Hello and welcome to Spotlight One. I'm Karen York. We still have a few months left in this school year, but it's not too early to start planning for next year, and that includes developing the district's general fund budget. And here to talk about that process are our superintendent, Dr. Craig Witherspoon, and our chief operations officer, Mr. Ed Carlon. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Dr. Witherspoon, good to have you back.
Thank you.
And
Good
of
to
course,
be back.
Ed, glad to have you back for
Yeah.
your second appearance on the show.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Well, Dr. Witherspoon, when we do the Spotlight Ones, we normally at least start off talking about something related to COVID, and we
Sure.
know that even the budget development process takes place in the context of COVID because we're still in the pandemic right now.
Absolutely.
So where are we now in our COVID journey in terms of Richland One? In fact, the only question that was submitted for this show was when is the mask mandate going to be lifted? And of course, that came up during our board meeting last night. Where do you see us right now in terms of COVID in Richland One?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having us today, and I want to go back a few months or to the beginning of this school year and kind of take us through that through the journey that we are still traveling. And that being said, I want to thank certainly our students, our faculty, and staff, our parents, and all of our stakeholders for working with us during this time. For certainly the mitigating strategies that we've had in place, for those things that were keeping us in a good place. And I know a lot of our staff and our students and families were impacted by COVID-19. And we navigated through that, and I would say in a pretty good fashion. Those things that we had in place and that we continued to do. So we want to thank all of our stakeholders for that. Now, that being said, certainly we started this school year back in person with the mask requirement. I think that's the big concern or question that we have right now. And giving our numbers that we track on our dashboard and that information, we do feel like that mitigating strategy did help us. We saw lower numbers than some others. We saw some lower percentages. And actually a better correlation, if you will, between the quarantine numbers as well as those positive cases. So we do feel those things helped us. Now, that being said, with Delta and then Omicron, numbers went up and they are decreasing. And part of what we see now, even in that decrease, some of those indicators, positivity rate and trends and so forth, are still higher than they were with Delta, if you will. Although we are on a decline, and we're appreciative of that fact from a community standpoint. So that being said, we know that DHEC, our state health agency, has been making tweaks to their guidance, and now it seems like just about every week there's some nuances and some tweaks that come out, and we do understand that. But we still want to remain vigilant at this point. So we are aware of those tweaks that in guidance that DHEC puts out, some as late as yesterday,
Right.
If you will. And one of the major pieces of what they put out yesterday was around the test to stay, and kind of doing away with that. But we in Richland One, again, throughout the pandemic, we were fortunate. We have a very strong relationship with Prisma Health and other entities around vaccination activities, and also around testing. We've had testing going on weekly.
Right. Every Tuesday morning.
Every Tuesday morning. So We did not feel the need to take part in that test to stay because there were testing opportunities. And even outside of the Tuesday morning, there were other locations in our community where students, families could go, and we would have some more real time, if you will, data that might not have existed in some other parts of the state or in other communities. So that was one of the pieces. And certainly with DHEC coming out with, did organizations need to continue with mask mandates and so forth? They've changed some recommendations, guidance on that, but never said, okay, stop doing. And again, while some of that guidance sometimes can be nuanced, we do examine that, certainly with our safety team, our lead nurse, and those that are a part of the team that makes some of these, that evaluates that DHEC information, CDC information, relative to our dashboard and things that we have. And we do continue to monitor that. So that being said, as numbers get better and things transition, we're looking at that. We're certainly in the last couple of weeks, if you will, in February, and we'll continue to monitor that. We look at that information as DHEC adjusts their guidance relative to CDC and other indicators. And we look forward to making a recommendation in the near future to our board, again based on that information that we have, and we'll continue to move forward. But as of today, this taping, again, we're continuing to monitor that, get that feedback, and we'll move forward in the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
Right. But as it was noted last night, what we've done so far has served us pretty well in allowing students to continue to go to school in person. We haven't had to shut down any schools or anything like that. Yeah. So we've done pretty well.
We have.
Yes,
we have.
Yes.
Yeah.
So of course we received some funds like many other school districts did, ESSER funds, COVID-related relief. But Ed, those are separate from general fund, correct?
Yes, those are separate funds. Those are federal funds. They're able to be spent in different categories. So we have to stay within those and get the approval before we go ahead and spend that.
Right.
So we've gotten approval, but as we go along, we may have to make changes just because everything changes as we go through this process. Just
identify a few of the things that we've spent those funds on so far.
Well, one is ionization units in the HVAC, which kind of takes the virus and kind of has it just drop down, does not go through the system. So that ions connect to those virus pieces that are out there.
Okay.
We've done a lot of summer work with the students, extra work, having extra teachers and that type of thing. Reading interventionists, math interventionists. And last night we did the PA and bell system for the schools.
Okay.
All of these things were pre-approved before we did them. I think the meeting before we did smart boards from ESSER. So we do a lot of different things that are geared towards either the pandemic and COVID or towards learning loss and the classroom.
Right. Now, Dr. Witherspoon, of course, last week you delivered your State of the District address.
Yes.
And as we start talking about the budget development process, you did identify some things that we're looking to do next year. You want to mention a couple of those before Ed gets into his presentation?
Oh, absolutely, because some may indeed be tied to Mr. Carlin's presentation. One of the things that we mentioned was the possible expansion of our language immersion program. And we started the language immersion program with a grant, with an NSAP grant, federal grant process allowed us to get started with that. And as those funds are expended through the years, it's for a certain, again, we certain grade levels and so forth. But our immersion program has been successful.
Yes.
So much so that, and time does fly, that it's time to look at expanding that into the middle grades. So part of what we will be looking at moving forward is how we expand that program so that our students have that opportunity to be immersed, if you will, in other target languages other than English. And again, that calls for additional teachers, additional staff, so they're exposed to the curriculum not only in English but also whether that's Mandarin, whether that's Spanish, whether that's French, and so forth. So we want to look at expanding those types of things.
Because those students who started out are now in 5th grade.
They're now in 5th grade.
They're like, what's next?
Absolutely.
We want to keep going.
Yeah, we want to keep that going. And connect that, again, to some of the upper level language courses that connect in our high schools. So this is the bridge, if you will, to connect. So there's that piece. Also, what we've been looking at for a number of years with our strategic plan is kindergarten readiness and early childhood, and certainly knowing the positive impact of that early exposure to language, to word acquisition, to all of those things associated with getting students prepared for kindergarten. And we had been looking at it for a number of years, but then COVID came and kind of slowed that down a bit. I say all that to say the creation, if you will, of perhaps one, maybe even two, early childhood centers. And by that, not just, we're looking at pre-K classroom expansion, whether that's 3K and 4K. But also that birth to 4 piece. Okay. Again, those critical years that we work with parents before students are born. We work with our community agencies, those child care centers that we know work with our students before they get to us and make sure that their curriculum, if you will, is aligned to what we offer. Medical services, other support systems, again, from a birth to 4 standpoint, so that we connect all of those pieces as well, because we know in our Richland 1 footprint, about 50% of the students that are eligible for pre-K services are actually served either by the district or by private child care facilities. So we want to work and close that gap. And again, make sure there's alignment from a curriculum standpoint, from a support standpoint, given all that our families sometimes have to deal with, so that our students are prepared. So that's another piece that we want to look at as we move forward. And that's some considerations, again, as a part of the budget process, as a part of our strategic planning process as well.
Have we gotten into the finer points yet of where the centers would be or anything like that, or is it too soon to get into that?
Well, just looking at, again, some of the information and where these young people are in those families, perhaps in the Lower Richland area, as well as the Broad River area. So those are the 2 areas that we're looking at, again, given some of the data and where students are who need to be served, and where there may be a gap. So those are those 2 areas. But in that, what location and all of those things, that there's still a whole lot of details to be,
I'm sure,
to be worked through.
Great. Those are exciting. Those are great initiatives there. So Ed, I know you have a PowerPoint there. If you would kind of take us through that, and as we talk about the development process, sort of the steps, what have we done to this point, what's coming, what are we looking at, those kinds of things.
Okay, well, thank you. And normally we would be going out to the different locations and doing this face-to-face. With the pandemic, we're doing these virtually, not only with the taxpayers, but also with staff. So I would run through this PowerPoint, and it is early in the budget process. Even though we've been talking about it for about 3 months now, it's still early. And I'm going to give you some background information and kind of where we're at this point.
Okay.
So the fiscal year 2022-23 budget, basically we start that process in December and then work through it, just starting with what do we want to do, what our priorities will be. So the first thing, major budget challenges for this coming year is the state and local funding. It takes a while for us to get the information from the state and from the county. Teacher salaries, that's a big thing across the state with the number of teacher vacancies that are out there and how many people are actually leaving teaching. Then we have mandates from both the state and from the federal, and we have to make sure we fund those as required. And then, of course, the pandemic issues are a consideration how we do the budget. So the current, or the last 3 years, general fund budgets, roughly $337 million in 2020, up to $345 million in 2022. But I will say, for those 3 years, we did not ask for an increase from the county in the millage.
Okay.
So whatever it was, that's what we stayed with the last 3 years.
And I think we said during your State of the District address that Richland 1 has had the...
Yeah, we'll get to that.
You're going to give it to me?
We'll
Okay,
get to that.
all right. You know, I like to get those points of pride out there.
Yeah. So going just some background, back when the first state reduction started back in fiscal year 2009, the base student cost was at $2,578 per student. By fiscal year 2011, it had been reduced down to $1,625, which was the funding amount in 1995.
Wow.
Then, for fiscal year 2019, we were scheduled to get $2,485, which was fiscal year 2008 level. The current fiscal year, we should have been getting $3,140 per student. We're only getting $2,519. And that's based on a Education Finance Act from 1977. And these are the state's calculations. They're not our calculations. That's what the state says. But they haven't really funded us since 2009. And then there's a graph here that will show where we were in 2009 down 2011, where we're currently at, and really we're about $10 million below where we should be funded based just on the EFA and their calculations. But you'll see how that goes down and it goes up a little bit. A couple of items. One is the percent spent on instruction. Now, there's a proviso always in the budget since 2009 saying if you spend 75% or more on instruction, then you can flex your other funding sources. There are some that you can't, but many you can. We've been over 82% on instruction. So that we've had the leeway. We have used flexibility. It's been quite a few years since we have, but we're able to do that, and if we need to. The next, I think, key information is your expenditures and how they're broken out. You have your salaries and fringes, supplies, different things like that. The higher your salaries and fringes are, the less flexibility you have. And that's when you get cut, and from wherever, whether it's state, county, whoever, it doesn't matter. we were at one point up between 88%, 90% on salary and fringes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, majority of our costs are people.
Right.
We've been currently the last couple of years staying right around 85%. Gives us a little bit of a cushion, not a lot, but it's a cushion, so that helps in case there would be cuts. So that's important. And just to give you some information, going back to 2006, the Act 388 tax reform. Prior to Act 388, owner-occupied homes were taxed for all jurisdictions, including school operating tax. After Act 388 was passed, owner-occupied homes are taxed for jurisdictions except for school operations. Now, they still pay for the debt service.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't pay the operating tax. I pretty much cut theirs close to half in many cases. At least I noticed that on ours. Then we get to the point that you were referring to earlier. And for 3 years ago, for 3 years in a row, we were about the second lowest in Lexington, Richland County for millage.
Mm-hmm.
As of tax year 2021, we're the third lowest.
Okay.
But you have a small district that is way, way below everybody else. And then you have us, and then Lexington 5 is lower than us. But you have to keep in mind that all the Lexington counties or districts have a capital 1 penny sales tax. So that kind of reduces their
Right.
millage right there.
Mm-hmm.
And we did try and get that when we did the bond referendums, but the whole county didn't. Richland 1 passed it, but the other counties,
Right.
districts did not. So we're trying to keep them down, and that's partly from not asking for an increase the last 3 years. Some of the adjustments that we made this current fiscal year, we did the required step increase for teachers, plus a $1,000 salary increase. And that was required by the state. And then increase for language immersion program, looking into the middle grades.
Mm-hmm.
Increase for the reset program, and that's been very successful.
And Dr. Witherspoon, give us a sentence or two for people who aren't familiar with that program.
Right. The reset program is something we instituted about 3-4 years ago that worked with students at the elementary level that experiencing some trauma and issues that cause some pretty severe behavioral issues
Mm-hmm.
in school that prior to the start of this program would result in suspension and time out of school, which could have or did exacerbate some issues,
Mm-hmm.
whether at home or whether when they came back. So we put a program, a pretty intensive, staff intensive, small ratio for staff to students that would work with those students and parents around what those traumatic experiences may have been and how to mitigate that impact and to see, perhaps what were those antecedents or what caused that behavior, mm-hmm. so that strategies could be implemented for students as well as families to bring that down. Okay. So when students were in school, some of those triggers perhaps could be avoided, mm-hmm. and even when students were at home and in some other situations, those triggers could be avoided as well. Because as we talk about preparing students and having them move forward, if you sometimes don't get to those root causes at the beginning, you're always treating symptoms, so mm-hmm. to speak. The suspension, the time out of school, the disruption in class, and so forth. And if we can get to some of those root causes, put some things in place, strategies and systems in place, we could mitigate not only the behaviors that resulted, but also not having some of those behaviors start and those traumatic experiences in the first place.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So some of the other items adjusted in 2022, We also did an increase for the classified staff.
Mm-hmm.
And then the state required us to do a 5% increase for bus drivers.
Right.
Then some of the things that we did to help pay for this, we reduced travel paid from the general fund. We did a freeze for vacancies for other than teachers with some exceptions. We suspended some of our technology dollars that we were putting into technology. We didn't reduce it all, but we reduced it some. We suspended the vehicle replacement that we usually do out of the general fund. And then we reduced the utilities and energy costs like we saw last night for this year's budget.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the priorities Dr. Witherspoon already talked about: expand the language immersion program, increase pre-K classes, and increase teacher salaries. Mm-hmm. And those are the top. That's not the only thing we will look at, but those are the things we want to look at first. And they're pretty important, those particular ones. There may be things that come up that we have to look at, and we will certainly do that. Then some early budget info from Legislature, and this is before this week. Mm-hmm. Over the weekend I got a bunch of information, but the step increase for teachers, which we normally have every year, increase for retirement 1% for the employer share, not the employee share, increase for health insurance, that's been going up across the country. Mm-hmm. So just those items right there is an increase of about $5 million. Wow. The budget process, each department will justify the amounts for the fiscal year 2023 budget, and that's the zero-based budgeting. Each school will receive an allocation of staff and component budget, and that's based on the student counts at each school. Everything above that, they would have to request and justify. Mm-hmm. Each department will have to justify all the full-time equivalents and all component budget amounts that they need for the coming year. So that's the process they're in right now. They're turning those in. We're going to review them, put them all together, and see where we're at from there. So the budget process for 2023 is different than in the past years, just from the standpoint of doing it virtually versus in person. Mm-hmm. But we still ask that anybody that can to contact our state legislators and just basically tell them, can you please fully fund education? Now, under the old formula, it would be ask them to fund $3,164 base student cost, but that looks like it may be changing. Because the formula, according to from what I'm getting the information on, is likely to change. Wow. And that's where we're at for the information that we had up to that point until we got information this weekend.
My goodness. So timeline-wise, yeah, I know you said we're still kind of early in the process.
We are. We will be doing a board work session once we get the numbers put together sometime in April.
Okay.
So the month of March is where we're going to get information mostly from the state, mm-hmm. so that we can put the information together. I will get an estimate from the county of where we are based on the current assessed value. Did it go up? And then decide if we need to ask for an increase in millage or stay the same. Those things we still talk about. And then in April, we'll do a work session with the board, have a first reading, hopefully the first meeting in May, mm-hmm. send our budget request down to the county. They will have 3 readings. The state will finalize their budget sometime in May. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's longer, June. June, yeah. I know for fiscal year 21, they didn't do it till May of the following year, right. But normally we'd get that information early in June. Mm-hmm. So we try and finish by June 30, but sometimes we get into July. But we've done a continuing resolution, allows us to continue operations till we get that passed.
Right. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that information, Ed. And Dr. Witherspoon, as we again talk about that process, what else would you like for our stakeholders
Sure.
to know as we work those steps in that process?
Well, just to emphasize a few points that Mr. Carlon made, we do make sure that we're good stewards, certainly of the taxpayers' dollars, whether that's energy savings, whether that's the budget priorities in terms of what it is we want to do to continue providing options and opportunities for students, where those gaps may be. And the continued evaluation of whether that's programming, whether that's any other things that we do, so that as we need to make adjustments and so forth, we do that. And we have seen and continue to see, again, those efforts to pay off for our students, and we want our community to know. Again, we look at this, as an investment in our students and as an investment in our community, because the young people that go through our system, certainly from when they enter to as they leave, we do grow our students and feel that they're ready to go out and move from grads to greatness.
Yes.
In terms of what it is that they want to do. We continue to give updates through the budget process, and as well as, whether it's the state of the district, whether it's our Spotlight Ones that we, your shop communicates and sends out, that again, we're good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. We make sure that the things that we do are indeed aligned to our strategic plan and what those goals are, and be good community stewards as we educate the students here in Richland 1.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate both of you coming on the show and informing everyone about our budget development process. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to having you back.
Absolutely.
Okay. And thank you for joining us for this edition of Spotlight One. All right.